Such a senseless waste, every one of them. Some at Pentex believe that the Red Talons are our unwitting allies, unknowing pawns of the worm, that they serve our purposes in some way. I feel that is to underestimate them and make a complex situation less so. They are all feral, they are all bestial creatures. They are, however, feral animals in a zoo, or test lab if you prefer, and they see the bars, they rail against them, they wish to escape, not understanding that there is another cage a little further on, and then another, and then another, and then another. This is not a world for the Red Talons any longer. But it would be a disservice to say that they are entirely incapable. The Red Talons are dangerous, they are fierce. They have better control over the aspects of nature that we do not even understand. They understand cairns, they can speak the language of the spirits perhaps better than any other tribe. They know the Umbra inside and out. Why? Because they are so attuned to nature, because they are so uncomfortable in urban environments. This is why we very rarely cross paths with the Red Talons. After all, unless we are drilling for oil in some out-of-the-way locale, or some agent of the worm has directed us to this far-flung location, the Red Talons stick to their part of the world, we stick to ours. We have the advantage because our part of the world is expanding. Urban environments are getting larger, nature is getting smaller. This is why we clash with the Glasswalkers and Bone Gnawers to such a degree. The Red Talons often fall off the radar. This should not be the case. They can be turned into useful weapons against the rest of the Garou. All it takes is a little bit of time and energy. Certainly, they are underestimated by my peers and by other Garou. They underestimate themselves. And this is largely because they are marginalised, not just by their own, but also by the world entire. There is not much room for wild wolves these days, or nights. Red Talons all, to a singular, descend from lupus. None of them are born homid. I understand that were one to be so, it would be sacrificed to Griffin, or some other totem spirit that the Red Talons hold in high regard. But the Red Talons attack and act with such base ferocity. You could be excused for thinking that they are Geta Fenris, but lacking the subtlety. They will charge full bore into a hellhole just to prove a point. They would take down a dam just to wash away black spiral dancers whose camp is on the other side of it. Uncaring for the fact that there's a human village or town also in that river basin that has been long dried out. They do not care for such things. After all, it's a victory for Gaia either way. If the black spiral dancers lose, if the river runs once again, the wild triumphs. And the Red Talons do love their wild. In fact, I know some Red Talons, or know of some Red Talons, that would celebrate the death of the human civilization even more so than the elimination of the Black Spiral Dancer pack. Yes, the Red Talons have historically committed many an act of genocide, or as they like to call them, purges or culls of humankind, who they feel are encroaching too far onto Gaia's bosom. After all, that heavenly tit is just for them to explore. This puts them at odds with some of their fellow tribes. After all, every other tribe has members made up of homids who are automatically held in low expectation and assimilation by the Red Talons. They assess the homids as being less than them, and therefore they do not utilise them. And, of course, in this world where wolves are dying out and humans are expanding, you can see that the Red Talons are slowly shrinking. As I say, they can be used to great advantage. Their prejudices against most of the other tribes, their extremes are anathema to so many other. They are for large parts, directly responsible for the elimination of the Bunyip in Australasia, a tribe of Garou that does not bear mentioning again. Certainly before our time, before your time at the very least. The Red Talons launched the purge against the Bunyip due to their being different, due to their not being understood. The Red Talons do not like things they understand. They automatically leap to their feet or their paws and proclaim through a howl that this thing must be of the worm or this thing must be of the weaver, for it is not something that I recognize. Is that not just so pathetic? Is it just not so weak in this modern world? Is there really room for such diehards? I would argue not. The Garou nation, for the most part, argues not. But what to do with the Red Talons? You can't just push them towards the worm, they say. We better keep them close. Except I know of some Red Talons that have developed a taste for human flesh. Not only do they desire the deaths of humans, they desire the consumption of humans as well. There is some grand ritual surrounding it that supposedly makes them stronger. Griffin's brood does like to push the boundaries of the werewolf litany, and yet they're allowed to get away with it. I suspect mostly that it is fear of losing another tribe that keeps them close to the hearts of the others, seen as somewhat of a dim-witted or perhaps simple cousin, rather than a stalwart ally. After all, if your kinfolk are homid, how long before the Red Talon gets hungry and pounces on them? You know, one of the directors of Pentex was a cannibal. I see no harm in that, you understand. But then, he was not attempting to claim that he was serving Gaia's best interests as he chowed down on a victim. The Red Talons, being hypocrites to a wolf, would have you believe they're serving Gaia through the murder and consumption of their human prey. How easy it would be to turn them into a new form of Black Spiral Dancer. How many Red Talons become Black Spiral Dancers, feeling that they are pushed aside by their fellows? We scarcely need to do the job. Defeating the Red Talons is not a difficult task. If you were to ask me, personally, I would say, wait 100 years. After all, they are all lupus. Either they change, and they lose all that it means to be a servant of Griffin and a Red Talon, or they get to a point where wolves are so few in the wild that their tribe has just ceased to exist. It has reached extinction. But we know the apocalypse is coming in a shorter time than a century, so let's talk realism here. How to deal with the Red Talons here and now? Well, if one wanted to be mundane about it, you could move their cubs along by urbanizing parts of their wildlife, start a big building project, and move innocents in the way. I don't mean to say that you throw a first team full of Fomori in to start building prefab houses or a factory or an industrial complex. That's the kind of thing that would draw the Red Talons' backs up and ignite a full-blown war that against the Red Talons in their territory is not one that's worth fighting. No. You hire innocents. You hire the clueless mortals to do your bidding to build these houses, and then the Red Talons are divided, or some of them will be. More will just say, no, they are invading our territory where they need to die, and that puts them at odds with their peers. A better way of dealing with them is when you find out where their cubs are, cubs. I always get them mixed up. Cubs, pups, little runts, offspring. You find a few impotent males, likely right-wingers, who haven't had an erection in a very long time. Most of the time you'll have to go to some kind of Masonic meeting to find the types. You should tell them that it really makes you feel like a man to wipe out one of these dangerous creatures and take its fur and make a pair of shoes for the missus out of its skin or whatever. You arm them with some high-powered rifle. You arm them with some bullets containing silver. You get in touch with Herculean firearms and get the guns on the cheap, of course. And you set good daddy Republican out hunting. Hunting kinfolk. Hunting them down. And when they step out of that forest after bagging a catch, and they only really need to kill one to make a difference, you don't need to send a first team in to deal with it, they'll come out with a massive erection and a broad smile, because they'll feel like a man for having taken down what is actually something that may grow to be a very great predator in the wild. Now, these are slow burners, moving them on, hunting them down one by one. The less, shall we say, civilized route is to get your friendly pack of black spiral dancers to visit those same pups, and to fuck them, figuratively and literally, to pounce on them, to hold them down, to spread a bit of spiral dancer seed, and then fuck off. Now, the Black Spiral Dancers have their own agenda. They may well kidnap some of these pups, and we have the surveillance. We can find where these pups can be found, so we could do the Black Spiral Dancers a favour here and help bolster their kinfolk by snatching Red Talon wolves. But a simpler route, a better route, I find, that breeds corruption within the tribe rather than just bolstering our allies' ranks, is to get them pregnant, or to shame them, to fuck them, to rape them. By doing that, if you're lucky, when Mummy and Daddy Red Talon return to camp and find their pups in such a state of disarray, if you've got a purified Red Talon, then he's going to see his offspring as besmirched, and with any luck, take its head off. Probably take its throat out. They're very hungry creatures. If you hit the jackpot, however, they'll raise the pup, whatever it may be. And just like that, you have a seed in a Red Talon camp that can be brought over to the Black Spiral Dancer camp. It will be born mutated, it will be born hideous, it will be born of the worm. And eventually, your Spiral Dancer buddies will home in on that pup and tell him some of the real truth, some of the real world. It is better to place a Manchurian candidate in with the Red Talons than to just snatch them away and re-educate them back at base. You just plant the seed. You don't need to kill the adults, you don't need to face the adults. In fact, I would strongly recommend that you do not. You merely need to shame them, disgrace them, besmirch them, make them dirty and unclean. They will draw their own acid bath to purify themselves.